Scott here on Flip That Script. Wanted to get into just a little bit about my no contact decision and what I did, and then start to tell you a little bit about my earlier life. After that really ridiculous family get together, shortly after Kathy and I's engagement, after all that had transpired, I had already decided, even before we got back to the apartment complex, just even after we left the dinner, that I was going to go no contact, and I just wanted some time to think about how I was going to do it. Meaning, was I going to tell them? Was I not going to tell them? Was I going to tell them by telephone, email, or maybe just ghost them? After a few days, let me back up. The following day, just to gauge things, and not that I was going to change my mind, I called just because it's pretty standard social practice to contact friends or family, not long after get together and say, it was great. Not that it was great, but I called just to gauge and just kind of blandly said, I'm glad we were all able to get together yesterday. And the first thing my father brought up was his false belief that after he and my brother both gave my son, who had been our waiter, a pretty exorbitant and excessive tip, very generous one, but of course they were getting free meal out of me. Wasn't hugely crazy, but it was a little bit showy. He said, "Did you thank me for giving your son a tip?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "No, you didn't." I just said, "I guess you must not have heard me." He said, "Did Stevie thank me?" I was like, "Yes, I heard him." He's like, "No, he didn't either." From what I recall, I found a quick excuse to get off the phone. It was just ridiculous. I spent some days trying to think of a plan, and within a few weeks I pulled it off. There was no other contact initiated either way. My father had given my first wife and I a painting that had belonged to his parents. He inherited it from them. His father passed away, I think, around 1995, 1996. 1995. His mother passed away in 2007. A year or so after Harley and I bought our house, that I ended up short selling a couple years after her passing. My father gave us the painting, like a narcissist or toxic person would do. The painting was given with strings attached. In the case of my father, it's his wanting of never-ending praise and wanting reminders of anything that he's ever done. You can find a lot of information about how narcissists view relationships in purely transactional terms. It was a week or so after our meal together, I think that was on March 7th of 2020, the COVID shutdowns began. A friend of mine, who was also a karaoke host, was thrown out of work. So I came up with a very interesting job for him. His job was to take the painting, which was now at my father's, at his call, and certainly with a fair amount of duress and coercion, had me place the painting in the museum of someone who his parents knew. Just basically said, don't be taking that to your new apartment. I complied with it, and what I decided to do was have a friend of mine, happens to be black. I have a lot of black friends. My father, I grew up with him telling racist jokes at the dinner table. I hired him and got the cooperation of the museum people, telling them who I was, to have him take the painting and take a long drive to personally deliver it to my father. My intention was to record him being abusive, so he fell right into the trap. When it was delivered, he was furious, and when he called, I basically quickly disengaged. I knew he would call back the next day, and when he did, I had the iPad all ready. His call was incredibly abusive. Around that time, and something I'll get into later, or perhaps you've already heard of it if you're watching channels like this and reading up on narcissism, I very much gray rocked him for about 4 or 5 minutes. He told me he was going to ship it back to me. I told him that the apartment complex had moved me to another unit. You could hear the change in his voice. He was really feeling a loss of control there. He started going on about being ungrateful, and if I want to be ungrateful because some other very wealthy father paid for his kids' college. Why college tuition was coming up is beyond me. I'm currently 56 years old. I graduated from college in 1989. Then he went on about, if you think you're so smart, why didn't you apply for a student loan like everybody else does? He was convinced that I could somehow qualify for a student loan when, if you're claimed as a dependent, on the tax returns of a parent or parents, especially if they make a lot of income, which my father did at the time when I was college age, I would not have qualified. I also couldn't qualify for a scholarship because even though I was a good student, I wasn't like a straight A student. I pretty much averaged about a 3.2 grade point average both in high school and in college, so I couldn't qualify for any scholarships either. And plus, I wasn't really involved in sports or extracurriculars, so that, along with the 3.2, was not going to qualify me for scholarship. And with his high income and claiming me as dependent, I certainly wasn't going to qualify for a student loan. Seems kind of besides the point. He got into some other stuff also, but basically I gray rocked him the entire conversation, and he kept looking for ways to kind of trigger me. And then I said, well, did you ask me to get a student loan? I was always a good kid and I always listened. Did you ask me to get one? And he would try to dodge the question, and I asked again 4 or 5 times. Once I did that, he said, you're being impossible. Then he hung up, and I hung up, and at that point anyway, I thought I would be going no contact for the rest of my life. I then, later that day, as planned, now that I had the recording, I shared it on Facebook, on social media, on the pages of a number of people who had known my family for decades. And then I began exposing him and my brother both on Facebook. By then I had blocked everyone, but was making public posts knowing that my brother was probably snooping. Did the same with my stepmom, who uses Facebook. My father doesn't. My brother's wife does. In any case, that's what I decided to do. And on the next video, I'm going to start to go into my earliest memories in childhood, all the way up to around the time of Harlene's passing. And then I'm going to skip over to what's happened post No Contact, which was the spring of 2020. Thanks for listening.